And we're back for another episode of Alfacast. I'm Mike Winner, and I'm here, of course, as always, with Dr. Bear Paul Lando. And today we are diving deep back into germ theory and the nature of contagion in relation to viruses, and coming from a bioterrain perspective, which is the background of Dr. Lando. And so we've gotten a lot of attention from our past videos on Louis Pasteur and Antoine Béchamp and, the historical perspectives of where we've gone on this road towards modern health in terms of kind of this fork in the road of where we have germ theory and we have terrain theory. And so today we want to just dive back into these concepts, because obviously everyone in the world, pretty much, I think a third of the world right now, if not more, is stuck at home because of a virus. So what better time to talk about this? How are you today, Bear?
Caught me in the middle of a swallow. Doing good,
Sorry,
thanks. Good. This will be a great one. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and it's great to see more people in the chat today. Our platform's definitely growing. If you're listening to this on a podcast later, we do this every Thursday at 10 in the morning live. We're running a little late today, but it's live on a platform called DLive, dlive.tv/Alfa Vedic. And we're really embracing this platform. It's an alternative platform that is as of now, doesn't have the censorship that something like YouTube has. So we're embracing these these newer technologies that are allowing for this kind of information to get out. So please go on to dlive.tv/Alfa Vedic and subscribe. And you can join in the chat. We get a lively crowd in here sometimes, and you can actually ask questions to myself or Bear or the guests that we have. So it's a great platform. And we are getting a lot of new subscribers and people to the channel. And, I just wanted to give a little background real quick before we dive in today. Alfa Vedic is many, many years in the making here. In fact, I remember, Bear, when I had a conversation with you, God, when we were really just starting this back in 2014, maybe 2013, when we had a conversation on the phone about germ theory. And it kind of shocked me when you told me about contagions and how, we don't get sick from outside bad guys and germs. And I was just, I asked you a lot of these questions. I think we had like a 2-hour conversation, and essentially that's what we're going to do today. But that was, God, back in 2014 when we really started to kick in the company, and it's grown. And really, this is a family company, with the Landos and myself. And we have a farm up here in Northern California on the border of Oregon, and we grow herbs and we make products. And if you want to support us, you can go to our website, alfavedic.com, and see all the wonderful products that we hand formulate and sell. And these are all formulated by Bear based on his decades of clinical work. And now we're offering these to the public directly from our website. So if you want to support us, that's the best way to support us and support your health. It's a win-win really on both sides. You can go to alfavedic.com. We've got an exciting new website coming out with an amazing new line of products. Our Life Force protein line has been totally revamped with a focus on immunity. We're bringing back our whey protein formulations as well, the goat whey, and it integrates colostrum and all sorts of amazing immunoboosting adaptogens and everything that Bear has put a lot of time into. And so we're going to actually have a pre-sale on these because we have a limited supply. So we'll have more information on that soon, but really, really exciting products coming out, as well as our new C60 line that Bear's been working on. So, so much. You can go to alfavedic.com. The old site's still up, but we're hoping to have the new site up in a week or so. And then we'll start teasing and pre-selling these new products. It's really exciting, Bear. I can't wait to get these out to the public. So that being said.
Yeah, me too. And everything's ready to go. Just get the technicalities done and we'll launch. And very timely with what's going on in the world, because they're really suited to people's concerns.
Yeah, I'm really excited about them. I can't wait. I'm a big fan of our products myself, so I take them every day, and it's really changed my life. We'll get a little bit into my perspective today, but mostly it's going to be Bear talking. But I will say I was riddled with things like strep throat and illness for years in my 20s, and Alfa Vedic's really turned it around for me. And really, more than the products, to be honest, it's this information we're going to go into today that really is powerful, because it's freeing. It really is liberating information, and I think it's more timely than ever. So let's get into it today. Let me just give a little background on what we're talking about today, and then I'll let you kind of dive in. I think you even have a presentation for us today, Bear. But basically, amidst this present climate of fear and confusion from COVID-19, a lot of people were just not trusting official channels of information, and for good reason. Everybody just wants the truth, and there's a lot of dubious statistics and conflicting reports that are amplifying this collective anxiety. In the Alfacast community has been encouraged with recent discussions within the authentic media from medical experts that paint a not so dire prognosis on this current issue. We're seeing it in the mainstream with, originally being told that 200,000 deaths in the UK, and it's dropped down to 20,000. And, so a lot of conflicting information out there. So we're going to dive in today and hopefully give a little bit better perspective on the nature of disease, what germs, how they relate to infection and contagion. And Dr. Bear Lando, I'm going to give a little background to him again, just so for those who are new to our channel can understand kind of where he's coming from. So I know, Bear, this can be kind of cringy for you because you're not really, you're so humble. But I think it's important for people to get a little perspective here on your background. So Dr. Paul Lando was both a pre-law and pre-medicine undergraduate student, recognized for maintaining a 4.0 GPA as a Division I scholarship football player, and later taught at the university level after completing his graduate degree in social psychology. Dr. Lando then obtained MICP certification at Stanford Medical School and served several years as a paramedic firefighter. Naturopathic college came next, with the curriculum emphasis in Chinese medicine and classical homeopathy, followed by graduating summa cum laude from Chiropractic College. He is a chartered diplomat in clinical kinesiology from Body Integration International and has completed numerous postdoctoral trainings and certifications in disciplines including Bioterrain Medicine, Japanese Meridian Therapy, Craniopathy, Visceral Manipulation, New German Medicine, Oxidative Therapies, Metabolic Typing, and Endobiogenics. Dr. Lando began his private practice in 1981 and developed an international following for people suffering from chronic degenerative conditions, seeking his services as a bioterrain medicine and functional movement specialist. In more recent years, he earned his Master Gardener and Permaculture Design certification through Oregon State University and presently oversees his off-grid medicinal herb farm while teaching organic farming and ionization soil analysis. Now retired from clinical medical practice, he remains active in the internal martial arts, health consulting, creating formulations for his herbal company, and developing innovative medical protocols based on the principles of waveform physics. So there you go. I'll throw it over to you, Bear. How do you want to start this today?
I almost don't know where to start. I did put some notes quickly on a PowerPoint presentation, but I don't want to make this over academic. I'd like to get through some of these topics as quick as possible because we've actually already had podcasts on some of the matter. And then I'm more comfortable just opening it up into a general discussion with questions. But, I am encouraged, as you've already mentioned, that there's a lot of prominent physicians and researchers, scientists, that are coming out with a whole different view of microbiology and resurrecting old school science, which is real science. It gives you a whole different understanding of what microbes are, and the fact that they aren't contagions at all, and without them, life wouldn't be possible. And a lot of these people, I'd encourage you to watch their videos. Just doing really good presentations. They're also giving an understanding that what we're seeing under the guise of CV-19 is, really kind of a smokescreen for a lot of other things going on. And, we don't need to get into that. And just so people know, I'm not suggesting that there aren't people with real symptoms out there. because there are casualties. But if you really look at the statistics without sensationalizing them the way the media is, you'll find that media reporting is very disproportionate. They're skewing the statistics, so miraculously CV-19, the way I see it, it's curing all these other diseases because nobody's dying from anything but CV-19. So,
yeah,
there's a
funny?
lot more going on. This is in actuality a financial reset. It's also ushering in the new cashless society and consolidating governance into fewer and fewer hands. And so, Mike, did you want to say something? You look like you want to say something.
Well, I did a thing for our Patreon where I kind of broke down some stats for, the official stats, and who knows what those are. And we can talk a little bit about how these tests for these quote unquote viruses play a lot into the game here, the con game. But here's a little perspective real quick on deaths in 2020 so far. So a third of the world is now stuck in their homes. Middle classes being obliterated, small businesses being destroyed, people's lives being turned upside down, and more than anything, anxiety and fears being driven by a boogeyman called CV-19. Meanwhile, so we've got about over, let's see, let's actually check here. What are they saying now in terms of the scary CV map here? We have... they're saying now total deaths. They're saying 981,000 total confirmed with 50,000 deaths in so far, which is a scary number. That sounds really scary. And we'll go into how those numbers aren't even really, that's very questionable. And we'll talk about that. But just to give you a little perspective, we've got from heart disease already, we have 2.5 million deaths. From cancer, over 2 million deaths. Children under 5, almost 2 million deaths. From smoking, 1.2 million deaths. From alcohol, we have 550,000 deaths. This is just in 2020 so far. Automobile accidents, 300,000 deaths. Suicides, almost 300,000 deaths. Malaria, 250,000 deaths. Seasonal flu, 125,000 deaths. Mothers during birth are more. 69,000 deaths. Where are we, this is an obvious connection here. Are we stopping people from driving cars with almost 300,000 deaths from automobile accidents? Are we forcing people inside, kids inside, children under 5? Because for some reason, there's a lot of them dying from probably novovirus, quote unquote, and all these other things that we don't talk about that have been around that, is the other media scare. So what's going on here with this? It's really fascinating that obviously there's a lot of craziness happening in the world always, and something we always talk about. This is like our number one thing we talk about on this channel all the time, is that it's amazing that people are alive after 14 with all the toxins in the world and everything and all the chronic conditions. We are a sick population. We are a very, very sick population, and we've been sold this narrative that we are at the apex of our civilization, that mankind's never been healthier, and thanks to modern medicine. But it's amazing that an average human being gets to be a teenager these days. So anyways, I just wanted to give a little perspective there, and I'll throw it back over to you.
Mike, did you mention the biggest statistic of all, which is the number of deaths by iatrogenic causes from medical intervention, and also taking pharmaceuticals as prescribed, which is actually very conservative because they don't consider a lot of things?
That's amazing that you bring that up. Actually, Dr. Andy Kaufman's in the chat with us today. It's so great to have him. I connected with him this morning, and he's been doing some amazing work out on YouTube and stuff, spreading this information. He just said, don't forget the 250,000 from from medical errors, and 128,000 from drugs. Obviously, this is a bold statement to say, but and I'll say it because I don't care, because from my research is that more death has arisen from vaccinations than anything else in the 21st century. period. So I'll put that out there. I don't care if I get flack from that. From my research, that's what I found. So anyways, go ahead, Bear.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Kaufman. You know, I've seen little snippets of a couple of your videos. You're doing a fantastic service out there. And people have to understand it takes a lot of courage. You know, I went a different medical path and, you know, after my pre-med and doing a conventional certification, but just, you know, went in a different direction. But people that work within the straight, you know, medical system have a lot to lose and suffer the greatest persecution when they leave the fold. And, you know, sometimes not good things happen. You know, I've had colleagues, I had one person that we were working together with people that had cancers. I won't even mention the area and everything, but we're having a good measure of success, not curing cancer, but understanding the cause of it in the first place and learning how to work with it. And he decided to get a little bit vocal. Now, I spent many years before him in, you know, practice and knew that, you know, I just needed to keep off the radar. Not that I was doing anything wrong, but I just wanted to practice unimpeded and be able to help people without interference. So he got out there and he suffered a very untimely demise. Now, he was not only an MD, but he was from China. And anyway, he also was very well versed in Chinese medicine, but I won't say anything more about that. But, you know, that's what happens to people. So to get out and speak in today's climate is can actually be dangerous. So thank you, Dr. Kaufman, and medical doctors that are really coming out in increasing numbers. Okay, so let's jump into this here. I'll start a little PowerPoint there, and forgive me if I'm a little clumsy with this, but
That's okay.
I can hardly see my screen because the sun's shining in here.
Not going to complain about the sun. Yeah.
Oh, no.
You know, and that's the thing. We are in an information war. Even though I hate to use the term war, but because that's their language. And speaking of language, that's the other trick that we're dealing with, which I'd love to talk about a little bit today. That's a whole other podcast, but they get us trapped in these specific boxes because of the language that they give us to use. So when we say something like virus, that's their language. And we kind of went into the history of virology a little bit with the Royal Rife podcast we did, Dr. Thomas Rivers and the Rockefeller Institute and such. But we get trapped using their language. And that's why we're going to use terms like microzema or protids today, things that other, you know, real scientists have come up with. That's our language. And so I think that's an important thing, is to start really getting back on our terms and getting our language out there so that we can have a better stance, a better, you know, foundation to work from. But that's where a lot of the confusion comes in, is that a lot of the times we're stuck using the terms in the game that they've set.
And that's a podcast in itself, Mike, because, you know, years ago I trained with a gentleman who was renowned at the time. He worked at the Supreme Court level, and he taught us, you know, real jurisprudence and how things have been hijacked there. But also, he was a master of language, and we've incrementally been taught to speak dog language, or dog Latin. It's called by the, and they really call it dog Latin, and they laugh at the commoners that use dog Latin because, you know, as we talk about in other subject matter when it comes to physics and waveform mechanics, when we're hijacked at the mental level and our creative faculties are being used to utter frequencies out there that are, you know, very powerful, and words have a lot of power, and these words that we're using all the time are unknowingly creating exactly what we don't want and creating the reality that other people want. And when it comes to you know, so we need to clean up our language, but it's very awkward because there's no words to describe what's really going on. And, you know, we'll run into that a little bit today. And towards the end of this presentation, we'll talk about When we get into new German medicine, we'll go beyond Louis Pasteur and all the microbe controversy and show what contagions really are on another level and how those are represented down into our physiology and microbiology. It's a lot of information that people take in, and the most difficult thing is we have to fundamentally change our belief systems and our thinking about everything we think is true. And just how William Casey from the CIA, decades ago, stated very boldly that we will have achieved our mission when everything the American public believes to be true is actually false. That's where we're at now. We don't know what upside down, right side up is. We're just totally confused. And contagions are one of the biggest scams that's ever been sold to us. Now, what makes this a little bit more difficult is that people are, succumbing with symptoms. And you have to understand that there are other causes for symptoms. Sorry, Mike, can you hear my phone in the back?
Oh, yeah, we know people are calling you with symptoms right now.
Yeah, that'll stop in a second. So
okay.
Forgive me.
I know you. Well, speaking of symptoms, I know you've been getting inundated with past clients and patients who have symptoms, and this will go to the new German stuff and other stuff. But go ahead.
Yeah, and we're getting aerosoled in the atmosphere. We're getting 5G'd. We're getting vaccinated. And all these things people don't consider, and we just revert back to our belief system as, oh, I caught a bug, I caught a virus, I've got the flu. And I'm constantly telling people, no, there's way more to it than that. There's a little community just northeast of us in Southern Oregon a couple years ago, very well known, where they're conducting an experiment there and aerosoling the hell out of those people. And almost everybody in the town was, very, very ill for over a year with the same exact symptoms. And atmospheric samples revealed that not only did they have the normal heavy metals and things that they spray on top of all of us, but they had live cellular matter, they had engineered microbes, nano robotic particles that I've seen in people's skin. People call it Morgellons. I've seen those with my own eyes. I've seen them under the microscope. So, we really have to understand, when you're hearing all these casualties, of very real people suffering right now, there's other things causing it. And then we also have bioengineered microorganisms, and I don't know, none of us know exactly what those are doing. We know that things like limes were, engineering spirochetes, started with live experimentation on a black male population, just injecting them with these things against their knowledge, or consent. And then that was the basis of developing limes, which was a bioweapon, a spirochete that detects normal immune recognition and, makes it so difficult to get rid of. So we've got all these things going on. So I'm not saying people aren't having illnesses or symptoms. It's just we have to wake up real quick and understand there's a lot more going on in meets the eye here. And it's not just, oh, I got a virus or CV-19, which has been part of the flu outbreaks for decades. And if there were real tests, in years past, you'd see the same proportion of CV, at those times. Okay, enough of that. Yeah. Let's get into a little history. Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say that's really interesting that you saw the nanoparticles in microscope, and that's just frightening. But what we'll get in today, and what's so inspirational, is how powerful our biology and our spirit and our soul is in being able to heal ourselves. And that in the end, it's amazing the amount of toxicity, and what we'll find out, and what my theory with viruses are. We have the systems already within us to protect ourselves. It's so amazing. Anyways, the human body and the human spirit is so powerful. Go ahead.
So what we'll talk about today is imagine a world before the Royal Society and the eugenicists and all the good people out there decided to experiment on us and take it in their own hands to treat us like herd animals. What we're going to report is how biology actually works, and how that all these things we're afraid of are actually more than just our friends. Mike, you stop me with any questions. And
yeah, I'm really going to
again,
try to
some
let
of this
you.
I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to belabor a lot of this because we have talked about it, but I just want to create a timeline. So here we go. Let's start out with some statements first. And okay, forgive me here.
Yeah, and
Hope this works.
you know, it's amazing how important history is, and how history is continually wiped clean by the victors of who's in control. So, man, and we talk about this all the time. To be a physician, you know, the classic physician is it's a full spectrum outlook on, from history to understanding economics, understanding politics. I mean, it really requires all that.
Yeah. Okay, can you see what I'm looking at?
Yeah.
Okay, Contagion's a Bioterrain perspective. And again, we'll move fast, stop me with any questions. So let's start with some just statements. And I did this on the fly real quick, so I don't know how good it is. I'll be experiencing it along with you here. All right, so science or mythology, you know, are contagions real? So human biology is a two-way holographic interplay of body and psyche seeking balance through microbial mediated pre-programmed processes. That's quite a mouthful, so let's read it again. Human biology is a two-way holographic interplay. Well, what do we mean? So if you go in the world of, you know, physics, electric universe people, and all the folks that are, you know, proving out these concepts, not just talking about them in the abstract, we realize that you know, our entire reality comes fundamentally from our consciousness, and that creates polarized electrical forces that create the vibrations that register three-dimensionally on our senses and give us our whole experience. Now, that means, let's just pretend that's true, whether you buy it or not. If it is true, then that means everything that we consider physical, including microbes, are byproducts of these other forces. So in order to get at the bottom of things and make fundamental changes, we have to go to that level, which means everything we're doing here on ground level, trying to come up with vaccines and antibiotics and all the things to fight the terrorist microbes, you know, we're coming at it from the wrong side of the equation. However, once we are in, you know, this belief system and we're experiencing these things and they seem awful real when they're happening, then that is going to interplay in the other direction too and kind of crystallize, you know, our creative faculties that are putting this stuff in motion in the first place. So that's what I mean. It's a two-way holographic interplay. And just like they talk about with fractal geometry and people that are into holographic, you know, science, we understand that everything in the old axiom throughout the ages, as above, so below, these things are representations of the same exact thing happening on different dimensions, and they have to outpicture in our little part of the world where, you know, we're experiencing things through our five senses. So and then again, it becomes a two-way street. And these this interplay also is constantly seeking balance. In other words, anything that is out of order from natural law, or, you know, the grander patterns that govern nature and all of universal life, then these patterns will seek balance. And we have built into our biology mechanisms that actually work in our favor to bring us back in alignment with the larger patterns, and you know, that would make us a lot happier and solve all of our problems. Now, we say that they're mediated by microbes. Well, microbes not only carry out all the functions on the physical level, and, you know, I'm a farmer, and the first thing we start with when we're looking at our soil, when we want to grow healthy things and make it sustainable, is we pay closest attention to the microbes and assure that we have the right balance and an abundance of them, because you're dead in the water if that's not happening. And that's what's happening to our agriculture these days. The soil's devoid of these guys. And these guys also in our body do the same thing, but they also convey information. They're like the little internet of things within our bodies, within the soil, and they convey messages from our external environment internally to us in our own personal ecosystems. So microbes, without them, life would not be possible. And we'll expand on that a little bit more. Okay, the second point: viruses do not exist or spread in the way we are led to believe. Now, again, take it or leave it, but there's a lot of very prominent virologists and people. Stefan Lenka is somebody that everybody always mentions because he's somebody that's really left a lot of good evidence and even done some things in court cases, that show that the conventional system had to acknowledge some of the things he was saying. But what we think of as viruses, we'll get into that a little bit more. And I, for years, do laboratory tests that show me exactly what I believe viruses to be. And there gets to be a little confusion too, because we're going to talk about pleomorphism, and that gets into the concept of protids or somatids, the way Gaston Nason termed them. And, I studied with him myself. And these guys, sometimes they're called viruses. Royal Rife said he was finding the frequencies to kill viruses. Well, it goes back to what you're saying, Mike. We use these words, and sometimes they get used inappropriately because we don't have any words for what's actually going on in the first place. So we'll talk more about that.
Beauchamp,
the seeds of... Go ahead.
Beauchamp called them vibrions or something that the microzema created.
Yeah.
So, yeah. There's different words.
So the seeds of bacteria and microbes exist within us and do not infect, but are instead activated. We'll build on that a bit. Interference with the biphasic activation of microbes can lead to dangerous or chronic symptoms. When I say biphasic activation, now you have to get into the principles of German medicine, which studies within New German medicine went so far beyond what our conventional medical studies do as far as proving their premises and actually giving physical evidence that what they're saying was actually true. We'll get to that. A deficiency of the necessary resources required by microbes to carry out the intended corrective functions will create a biological plateau of unwanted symptoms. A biological plateau is just something that I've used over the years because I don't know how else to describe it. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But, the reason why microbes sometimes look like they're creating problems is because they are being stymied to fulfill the mission they were intending to do in the first place. And when they were, secreting different things that give us fevers and, inflamed tissues and create all the other things we call symptoms, if they do not have the proper resources or are stymied by medical intervention, antibiotics, and that sort of thing, then these microbes let's just say overstay their welcome in certain phases of pleomorphic progression. And then, we feel sick, for a long time. And also it can become dangerous. And it's not through any fault of them or any intention of them. It's because our ecosystem has been tampered with. So the next one, fear-based assumptions grounded in the ignorance of these natural mechanisms represents the biggest impediment to personal health and collective progress. Because when you understand that your own system is designed to heal you and keep you in optimal health, then you will no longer fear these exact mechanisms and lead you to make some very uninformed decisions that are going to work against you very strongly. And of course, fear creates more biological toxins than any other I'd rather get chemtrailed all day long than live in a state of fear. You can survive that better than if you live in a state of fear. And that's a real physical thing. Okay, the last one, we say theories of germs and germ transmission are based on dubious research, limited by the vested interest of medically accepted technologies and scope of research. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So any comments so far, Mike?
Yeah, no, it all makes sense. I mean, basically the fear-based assumptions are obviously huge because that's what we're seeing right now. And we'll get more into with New German medicine, how fear literally creates the biological expressions that result in the symptoms of disease. Yeah, just fascinating. The first one, the human biology is a two-way holographic interplay of body and psyche, seeking balance through microbial mediated pre-programmed processes. That's so important for people to understand. It's a really amazing system. Our body is just so elegant. It's the most complicated, amazing machine in the world, and we treat it like garbage. So anyways, the reductionist scientism that has dominated the last 150 years is just pathetic. I'll leave it at that.
And understand that first statement, there's a lot of disciplines that one would necessarily have to study and understand in order to pick that one sentence apart. And what I hope to do today is, like a lot of the great doctors that are out there talking on this subject right now, what we bring to the table a little bit differently is that we haven't just studied these in an academic sense, but I've spent, several decades looking at these things under the microscope. I was trained in old school German microbiology and bioterrain medicine to understand what I was looking at. In my conventional medical studies, and then everything from naturopathic college and chiropractic college, those all gave me other perspectives that I could bring to the table within, the Bioterrain Medicine. And then when you are able to do these kinds of tests, including lab tests that we'll talk about later, then you can apply therapies. And as I, over the years applied these therapies based on the findings, you see that as the bioterrain regains normalcy, then people regain their health. And you see countless people recovering from terminal situations and other kinds of chronic, neurodegenerative diseases that they say are impossible to recover from. And you see them up and, walking again and all these kinds of things, not because of anything that a person like myself is doing. I'm not healing anybody else, but if you understand the bioterrain and have a way to assess it and then work with it, you literally see what the other side would call miracles, but we know it's not miracles at all. It's the way things are designed to work. So on the first page here, other considerations: bioengineered organisms and bioweapons. Now that's a complication. So a lot of these organisms are, operate in stealth. They go undetected by normal immune barriers. You have cellular poisoning. A lot of what, is going on these days is poisoning. We live in a remote area. We're in deep canyons, and we get protected a lot from the aerosoling. But every so often, in the last couple months especially, we were inundated right overhead for the first time. And then people in this small little community all of a sudden on the same exact day woke up with splitting headaches and fevers and all these symptoms that, people might say, oh, you've got coronavirus. Now, in my family, we understand how to purge these things. And within 24 hours, they're gone and you're as good as new and you're back to a normal day. However, people that do not have those tools or understanding those symptoms can hang on for a long time. So what I'm saying is that a lot of the symptoms are actually poisoning. And a lot of the viral conditions we talk about, viruses are made inside of us, as you'll see. And these viruses externally to us, really, I don't know how they can get into our body and take hold without them being injected into us. Because if you're just exposed to the nasal passages or your digestive system, they would die 1,000 deaths before they ever had a chance of setting up residence in your own body. So whole nother talk. So the introduction of foreign DNA into our bodies, via vaccination, genetically modified organisms that are in our food. All these things are doing very deleterious things to our bodies, to our health, and to our psyche, because as your DNA changes, those little, miniature antennas that pick up on the human bandwidth, to lead us into higher realms of consciousness, those are impeded. And so that's why people are living in fear and acting like herd animals these days. Okay, let's go to the next one, and we'll get through this.
Can I just say one thing about the it was interesting how you said how you have ability to negate the symptoms pretty quickly, and that's the other issue, is that most people fall to the common remedies by running over to their quote unquote drugstore. And what do? They get these allopathic solutions, which just might stymie some of the effects of the symptoms, but really just prolong and proliferate the underlying issues by not allowing the elimination pathways and stuff to get rid of the toxins. It's just hiding the symptoms and exponentially making them worse. And that's another massive issue which relates to all of this, is that the very solutions that have been offered to humanity are the ones perpetuating the problem.
Yeah, and we live in an area where there's nothing but dirt roads. So, when I'm out there in my truck, we're off-roading all the time. And we have to change our oil and our oil filters more frequently because we're off-roading. It's not like you're just driving around city streets. Mm-hmm. The fact is our bodies have the same filtration mechanisms, and our bodies now, no matter where you live, are off-roading 100% of the time because they're taking in all these substances. And so if you don't know how to go in and change the oil filter and purge the system in different ways, yeah, you're going to be getting sick more often. And that's why statistically life expectancies are plummeting right now, and people are getting sicker. Chronic degenerative diseases that when I first started in this business 40 years ago were rare or non-existent are now epidemic. A real medical profession would just sit back and go, what changed between then and now? But no, instead we keep saying, okay, we've got to have the war on microbes or find the vaccine, and of course, suspiciously, it always plays to the vested interest of certain parties. And enough said on that. So let's go. We'll get through the next ones a lot quicker here because we've already talked about these things, but holler if you want to say something. And I'd really like some interaction with the peanut gallery out there.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of people in the chat. As it's actually kind of quiet. I mean, there's some nice chatter, no questions of yet. I think people are just enjoying this presentation, so just please keep going.
Okay, so wait a minute. Let's go to the very first guy to create a historical timeline. Hippocrates lived a long time ago. So a Greek physician credited with synthesizing prior medical knowledge as a systematic study of clinical medicine. He asserted that disease was determined by environmental factors, diet, and heredity. And what we're doing here, of course, is setting up the understanding that it's about the terrain, not about an illness or a microbe. So biological life is microbe dependent. So Hippocrates proposed that all disease begins in the gut. Now, the gut is really the soil of your body, and there's a lot of talk about gut health these days, and very appropriately, because the gut is where all, an inordinate amount of these microbes live. It's where 70–80% of our immune system lives, and they live within all the lymphatic networks. One micron beneath the surface, the intestinal mucosa is very thin, and all these guys live in that area. So it's all microbe dependent, and they do so many functions for us. And, I practice Chinese medicine. And fundamental axiom of Chinese medicine is that all disease begins within the digestive system. So we see different places in the world, different time periods. And in Chinese medicine, this goes back thousands of years, just like Hippocrates. So everybody keeps coming up with the same thing except for our modern medics. Next point, the intestinal tract is the soil of the body, dependent on abundant and balanced microbe colonies, no different than the soil of the earth. Life would not be possible in the absence of microbes. So why are we so afraid of these guys? Let's go on to the next guy.
Classic inversion.
Yep, sure is.
They invert reality.
Beauchamp versus, yeah. So Beauchamp versus Pasteur, Mike, you did a great presentation on this, and then we followed up together and a little bit more, and I think we'll probably have to go back here. But
yeah,
we'll
right go
now,
back because my presentation wasn't that great, to be honest, but I was struggling with these new concepts. I mean, I've known about them since, like I said, we had a chat in 2014 about it, but to be honest, I look back at that and cringe. I can't even listen to it. So we'll go back and revisit these. And I want to do a whole podcast on Gunther Enderlein too, because that guy's fascinating. And also Wilhelm Reich. And then, of course, Gaston Naissance. Go ahead.
Yeah. And a few thousand people really liked your presentation. So maybe not that bad. Okay, the great conspiracy known as the germ theory of disease, and it is the grandest conspiracy. It's conspiracy facts, not conspiracy theory, was seeded by the political forces that were backing the now infamous con artist Louis Pasteur. And there's no other way to describe him. The guy was a snake oil salesman. Okay, so Antoine Beauchamp, his contemporary, was the real guy that did the real research, had the authentic understanding. He was a real scientist. Louis Pasteur, even during his time, his contemporaries recognized him as being kind of a second-rate plagiarist. So Beauchamp's cellular theory advocated treat the patient, not the infection. We could go, again, much deeper in this, but let's just get some ideas across. Microbes are opportunistic, and we'll talk more about that. That means if the environment is such, then they will pleomorphically change in ways to meet the demands of the ecosystem. And these microbes originate from within. We'll see that. He then concluded that microzymas, it's just his languaging rather than protids, somatids, and so forth, were more basic to life than cells. Now, when I look under a microscope, as I've done thousands of times for many years, when I see these microzymas or protids or somatids, and you see an abundance of them in a certain form, you know that that person is very vital and healthy. When you see scant numbers of them and other changes, in the blood, then you know that, the ecosystem is not going in the right direction. Now, Louis Pasteur plagiarized the research of Beauchamp and mischaracterized his findings to foster the germ theory of disease. And of course, he had the full backing of the predator class because this, the medical system was by design a major method of social engineering and control. And to this day, we see in current events that we're getting our chains pulled more than ever because many generations have been thoroughly brainwashed, especially us doctors. And there was a time, and I've shared the story, where I got red pilled, we'll say, and I was about to vaccinate my kids and got exposed to some different information, did a lot of research, went through a lot of emotional turmoil, and, still wasn't completely sure what to do, with the situation, and then just followed my intuition, lived in a lot of fear because of it. And now I look back and say, thank God. But I understand how these engrams get deeply implanted in our consciousness, and it's hard to get rid of them because people and institutions that we have been taught to trust tell us this is the way it is, and they have very impressive facilities and all the money in the world behind them, and we have been taught that doctors are gods, and no different than when you're in a voodoo culture and the voodoo practitioner shakes some bones at you. If that is your belief system, you will get sick and you will possibly die, because that is the power of our psyche. And now when a person in a white coat says you have, oh my God, coronavirus or cancer, well, is it any doubt that, maybe our health declines from that point on? So Pasteur allegedly recanted his theory at the end of his life, stating the microbe is nothing, the terrain is everything. I like that story. I say allegedly because there's some controversy whether that happened, but we'll just throw it out there for the heck of it. Yeah. All right. So the next guy we'll talk about is Gunther Enderlein.
One thing I'm exploring with Louis Pasteur, and I've heard from a couple of people, is his connection to the Vatican. And I will come back with more. It's really hard to find information on this, but there are some interesting investigators making some very interesting connections. We obviously know he was connected to the king of France and the hierarchy there, but there seems to be some darker connections too. So, me, I love a good conspiracy. So I'll be back with more information on that.
The Vatican, boy, let's get into that more. My family has some direct bloodline connections in that area with one particular pope, and and I'm going to try to get Jason to hook me up with Leo Zagami, and because he's a walking historian for everything Italian. So I want to get him on and explore more into the Vatican and get into some of my family connections, because I really want to know more. I'm trying to research that all the time, and I only can get so far. Okay, so Gunther Enderlein, pleomorphism. Pleomorphism just means that microbes, just like a butterfly that goes through the different stages until he flies away, goes through the larvae, the caterpillar stage. Microbes do the same thing in our body. We don't go out in nature and see creepy crawlers on a dead deer carcass and say, oh shoot, those flies killed another deer. That would be kind of silly, but that's exactly what we do with germs. And we find them at the scene of the crime, and we make these really stupid assumptions because that's the way we're taught. And they just go through these life cycles, and some of those life cycles are purposely meant to recycle old, dead, diseased tissue in our body so that we can regain health. And let's talk more about that.
You know what Bishop said? Bishop said, "Nothing is the prey of death, but the prey of life."
I love it. Perfect. Thank you. So Gunther Enderlein was a German zoologist and entomologist who based his work on the book Microzymas by Antoine Bouchamp. He just went the next level and was able to visualize these through microscopy, and is able to take it to the next level because he was able to see what Bouchamp was able to extrapolate through other studies. And now Gunther Enderlein's kind of a hero of mine because when I studied classical German Bioterrain Medicine, it was from that direct lineage that was created by him. And he also created isopathic remedies that are the protid form of these organisms that live inside of us. You know, we have different classifications of them. We have the penicillin variety, not to be confused with the pharmaceutical penicillin, but penicillin frequentans, penicillin notatum, penicillium roqueforti, Candida albicans, different forms of Candida parasilosis, mucorracimosis, Aspergillus nigrate, and there's many others, you know, that work on different levels, and these are the core of bioterrain medicine. We do a lot of things to create the environment inside so that these little seeds can take hold and go clean up pleomorphic developments in the body that have overstayed their welcome and are creating problems, and then simultaneously repopulate the ones that you want, which is what you call immunology, not to be confused with vaccination, two different animals. And you know, and so bioterrain medicine really relies on repopulating these guys with the pharmaceutical preparations that Professor Enderlein developed. And of course, isn't it interesting that those are, even though I used them for decades, now they're harder and harder to find and banned in the US and Australia and you know, all the Commonwealth countries. Okay, colloids of life, or protids, reside in the red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, and all bodily fluids and tissues. Enderlein, you know, surmised that these are about a 0.01 micron radius, which just coincidentally equals the approximate size of what we think of as a virus. And electron light microscopy that bounces off beams and, you know, paints a very vague picture of what we think of as a virus. And by the way, folks, when you see those pretty pictures of coronavirus everywhere you look these days, that's a CGI representation, and that's not the real thing. That's a theory. And anyway, we could go more deeper into that. But Enderlein, you know, was surmising that these protids are more than likely, you know, what we think of as virus. You know, we'll talk more. So these symbiotic microbial seeds pleomorphically differentiate in size, shape, and function to provide for the needs of the human ecosystem. In his book, Bacteria and Cyclogeny, and I have that over on my bookshelf here, he presented arguments, proofs for pleomorphism that remain unrefuted to this date. Wouldn't that be cool if we were taught this in medical school?
Yeah, that would
How are
be
we
cool.
doing, Mike?
Good. Lively
Yeah.
chat going right now on the and the D Live here. And you know, Antoine, not to always go back to Antoine Bouchamp, but he is kind of the guy I geek out on right now. And I'm reading The Blood in Its Third Element right now, and he basically reiterates everything that Gunther Enderlein said as well. So there is a connection here of these illuminaries that all are seeing the same thing. Now, also one thing real quick too, and I don't know if you're going to get to her or not, but if you've heard of Dr. Philippa Owens, use it Owens?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And interesting that she's a newer person in the late 90s, 2000s, who using a new type of electron scanning microscope was able to basically see these, what she called nanobes. And it's called an environmental electron microscope or something like that. So there's it's there. We have a precedent over and over and over again of this.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll get into people like her in the future there. And when you get into the area of cancer, you'll understand, just like the microbial hoax, cancer, you know, is also a response, a biological response meant to heal. And, you know, way back when, you know, I'd see scars in people's bodies when you're doing dissection and everything, in body cavities, and they were described as tumor scars. And you know, this was, you know, I studied back at a different time when medics were all taught different things. And it keeps changing to accommodate the narrative that they want to sell. But, you know, it's just recognized that tumors come and go. and they didn't know why, but people most of the time weren't even aware of them, and they weren't a problem. And when they didn't go away, most often people died with them, not because of them. And when we get into new German medicine, we'll show how these normal healing mechanisms, the reason why sometimes they reach a biological plateau and keep developing in ways that become dangerous is because of all the tampering we've done with our ecosystem, and especially with medical intervention that prevents these guys from going full circle. So we're going to see too, when we get into new German medicine in a minute, that microbes have a great play in the whole cancer mechanism. And when these microbes are not in sufficient supply, then the tumor will not go away the way it's designed to do. So let's get back to this, see if we can finish it up.
Yeah,
and
sorry,
then
I'm
we'll
getting
go
good
more.
getting some good questions
Okay.
too. So,
do you want to do anything now or wait?
let's wait, because I think you're going to answer some of them already, and then I want to kind of get back into one of the big things is about what the immune system is, how it works, and how do we get, like, quote unquote lifetime immunity from something like, say, the chicken pox. So, anyways, or what the chicken pox is.
Well, immunity is another interesting term because it suggests, the army that's fighting the bad guys.
Yeah.
Our immune system, again, when you go into other levels of understanding, like in Chinese medicine, we talk about Wei Qi, the outer barrier, which also is teeming with microbes on the body surface. It's what defines us individually as a unique coordinate in consciousness that holographically, creates the bandwidth that we are recognized within the simulation as, Mike or any one of us. And it's more of a defining on a much more fundamental level, and it's not just this barrier to fight the bad guys. And so you see, everything that we think is all about weapons of mass destruction, terrorists. We need TSA. Oh, by the way, just like TSA never went away, after 911. Wait till you see all the things that we're going to be expected to live with after coronavirus being a normal part of life forevermore. So, that's what's really going on here. Okay, sorry, I digress.
I don't think people in Asia will ever stop wearing masks. I think that's just going to be their new reality. It's crazy. Anyways.
Yeah. Okay. So Royal Rife, the cancer cure that worked. That's actually the name of a book by Barry Lyons. And did I get his last name wrong?
No, Barry Lyons. We did a whole podcast on it.
Yeah. Okay. I read that a long time ago. Okay. His universal microscope, he called it a universal microscope, was able to provide amplification levels of 60,000 times without killing the specimens. Now, regular dark field microscopy, the one I've used and seen Gaston Naissant's somatoscope, are not nearly as good resolution, but we have ways with the less resolution to do things that we'll talk about in a little bit that allow us to make very educated assumptions. But the universal microscope here could see things at an amazing level. And so Royal would spend 16 hours a day staring at people's blood and looking at what he called the virus, the cancer virus. Now, again, he's using the term virus very loosely because what the hell else do you call it? And that's what people, use out there in the conventional world. And, what he was looking at, could be cell fragments. It could be, the cell-matids and any number of things. But when these things get to a certain level and overstay their welcome, and I think especially cell fragments, then they can lower the milliamperage of the cells around them to, good milliamperage of healthy cells is about 70 milliamps. And if it goes below that or below 90 in the central nervous system, then cells, are not as vibrant And at that point, they need to be repolarized. That's what we do with PEMF technologies and so forth. And we were using the early models years ago in clinics because we understood we had to repolarize the cells that were literally like batteries losing their juice, and then the cells would be more amenable to the other modalities that we're using to help the body regain its health. So he would then look at these and then subject them by way of a radio tube to certain frequencies. And he would find what he called the mortal oscillating frequency that would kill these guys. So it's actually kind of an allopathic approach, because we're really not getting at the reason why there was an abundance of these things that were degrading the health in the first place. Yes. But when people are on their last legs and they've got what we call a terminal situation, you've got to knock these things down quickly in order to increase the window of opportunity so that these people can regain their health. And, that's the kind of things we did back in the day in order to, create that situation where people had the time, even though they already overstayed their welcome. And so that's why his technology was literally a lifesaver for so many people. And he himself at different times stated, well, you still have to take care of your lifestyle and all the factors that you got there in the first place, so you don't have to come back every few years and find the mortal oscillating frequency. And keep in mind, too, when Royal was doing his work, we didn't have 5G. We weren't sprayed like bugs from the atmosphere. Antibiotics were not, overused the way they are now. Food was less degraded. There was no genetically modified organisms. So there's, I know in the Rife communities, rightfully, they're, trying to use different step-down versions of the Rife technology, and it can be helpful. But, we live in a different time. There's different factors at play. And also we do not have the ability to see things to find the exact, mortal oscillating frequency the way he could just specify. So the reason why we talk about Rife here is, once again, he found that there's these little guys in the blood that, were endogenous, belonged, as part of our ecosystem. And he figured out a way to deal with them and help people regain their health. But it really helps paint the narrative that it's all about bringing the ecosystem, back into balance. Yeah. Okay.
He was amazing. Let's go. He was amazing at really bringing pleomorphism to that was one thing we talked about in that podcast, was the pleomorphism versus monomorphism debate was just raging at that time. And he was really crucial in showing that with his analog microscope, how that functions, because that's the other thing we talk about all the time, is that analog technology is where we need to be going. The digital technology is run by the controllers to obfuscate reality by giving us a simulacrum of what is truly nature. So we need to get away from the digital, back to the analog, back to Royal Rife Tech, stuff like that, so that we can see the truth.
Including our music. If I want to listen to old Beatles or something, I'll get out the vinyl. The CDs suck. All right. There's less information there, so you lose a lot of the stuff. And if you don't have an educated ear, you aren't getting the good harmonies.
But you were always playing them backwards, right?
I was. Paul is dead. I was in my dorm room with a bunch of other football players, and we're actually doing that. And I remember our quarterback was getting all spooked. He was, oh my God, is this true? Anyway,
Billy,
I think we might have been under the influence of something at the same time too, but I won't say much.
That
more
wasn't
about
happening in the 70s or 60s. Come on.
Okay, so back to screen share, and we'll get through these pretty quick, I hope. Next guy I want to talk about is Gaston Naissance.
Good old Gaston.
Another thing that all these people had in common is they were persecuted like crazy. Spent jail time like Gaston did, and I mean, it's just crazy. If the general public really understood what was going on, but instead they, not our audience. Our audience is more sophisticated, but the regular folks out there that hear things in the media, and so as soon as you bring up some of these ideas or individuals, oh, I read about him, he was in, he's a criminal, or that's quackery. So we are not losing the war on microbes or the war on cancer. This is a propaganda war. That's the war we're losing. And so Gaston Naissance, the somatoscope, he developed a really not quite like the universal, but more sophisticated than my dark field microscope, and pretty good resolution, and utilizing a combination of optics and electronics. He was a good inventor, like Royal was, and it allowed him to visualize somatids, what Gunther Enderlein called protids, and their predictable pleomorphic life cycle. I got a picture from a manual I have from a seminar I did with him, that'll show these in another slide or two. We only have 2 more slides, and then let's open this up.
So you just
Go
real
ahead.
quick, you met the man?
Yeah, in Toronto back, I don't know, 30 years ago, or yeah, a long time ago. So his findings not only validated the pleomorphic nature of microbes, but led to his development of 714X as yet another effective cancer therapy. Now, I can talk about this freely now because I don't do it anymore, and hopefully the statute of limitations has run out. But 714X was a high benzene content uh, concentrate. And what you did is you, for 21 days, you inject it into the inguinal lymph nodes. And, cancer, as we think of it, doesn't kill anybody, but people that succumb to a tumor that's on one of those biological plateaus, it starts robbing you of all your nutrition, especially nitrogenous, proteins. That's why people get all emaciated and literally starve to death. That's what happens at the end. Now, with injecting this in there, and he was ingenious to figure this out, you're putting in nitrogen, which breaks up the vicious circle that you get in where these tumors are cannibalizing you in order to stay alive themselves. And after a certain amount of time, it breaks that cycle up and then allows people to, just regain, their health and redevelop tissues. And again, it was a brilliant way of widening the window of opportunity so that long-term terrain medicine could, have a chance to do its work. And, bioterrain medicine, I would boldly say it will fix anything 100% of the time. But just like Vince Lombardi used to say in football, we didn't lose the game, we just ran out of time. Well, that's exactly how I feel about a lot of cases where people, did not regain their health. So
I've even gone as far to
analogy.
say is that diabetes can be reversed. And I've taken some flack
Okay,
with that.
so diabetes, real quick. What you want to do is you take your blood sugar, then you take total body sugars, which is something you do in ionization analysis. I won't say more because it gets involved. And then you have another reagent that you use, a Clini test. And there's a way to interplay between those 3 tests, and you can see if a person is truly diabetic or not. 95% of the time, they aren't diabetic. And in 2 to 4 weeks, using certain ionization analysis techniques, you can take that person out of the diagnosis of diabetes.
There you go.
Okay, another good subject matter to talk about someday. Okay, we're talking about 714X. It's just good to, touch on all these things because
I think we'll do a whole show on Gaston Naissance.
Yeah, we could. All right, so here we go. We'll just finish with, this is a quote. "I've been able to establish a life cycle of forms in the blood that add up to no less than a brand new understanding of the basis of life." Notice he didn't say disease, just like Mike, you talked about. That's the way Beauchamp looked at things too, and that's the truth. It's about life. It's not about disease. The medical establishment in its present state is a death cult. And what else can you call it when you have a group of people obsessed with death and disease rather than focusing on the mechanisms of life? It's like starting up a business and focusing on going broke rather than prospering. Doesn't work. Okay, so what we're talking about is an entirely new biology, one out of which has fortunately sprung practical applications of benefit to sick people, even before all of its many theoretical aspects have been sorted out. So Gaston was one of many people that came up with alternative therapies based on studying life. How are we doing, Mike?
We're doing great. Keep it going. We've got some questions.
Oh man,
But
we're going a long time already.
Yeah,
okay, we'll finish.
I want to
this,
get through these slides so we get to the fun questions.
Okay, and this we can do in less than 5 minutes. New Germanic medicine. Germanic new medicine requires a complete assemblage point shift and reevaluation of both allopathic and alternative therapies. I borrowed from Carlos Castaneda the term assemblage point because I always liked it. But what it is, it's a real energetic phenomena where it's like getting red pilled. When you shift your perspective, your basic understanding of life, then just like waking up from a dream one morning, you're seeing things with totally different eyes. So we have had our assemblage point altered so that we are seeing, as you pointed out, an inverted reality. So Germanic new medicine requires such a basic shift, in order to understand it, that we can't possibly do it any justice today or in 6 podcasts. So let's just plant some seeds for the future here. So it would require a reevaluation of both allopathic and alternative therapies because, unbeknownst to most of us holistic physicians, we're in the same old box and we don't even know it, okay? So we talk about his concept of a pre-programmed biological response. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Hammer bridged the chasm between spirit and matter with an evidence-based understanding of disease as a holographic facsimile of the psyche.
Wow.
Point number 1, human biology is designed to facilitate the transition from animal instinctual reactions to rational sentience. We could pull out some studies here that were done by one of my favorite Italian brothers, Nassim Harriman, who showed with his studies that humanity is in this midway point in consciousness where we have the ability to go in either direction. And our biology is programmed on, for the human biology with mechanisms that biologically express what we would think of as traumas on our psyche so that we can evolve beyond animal instinctual reactionary consciousness to more of a rational, level of thinking and sorting things out. And you'll notice that the media and school and everything else is constantly trying to drag us into just reactions, just really basic reactions based on animal lower animal instincts for survival. That's why everybody's freaked out right now and going for all this garbage. So complex human social interactions are biologically interpreted through instinctual programs to create psychological trauma. What's that mean? So in an animal situation, you have basic survival instincts that drive animals to just survive, basically. We embryologically have all of those hardwired into us. But because of the mechanism that Dr. Hammer discovered and proved, is that our psyche will then trigger a specific part of the brain to biologically represent that trauma that we are perceiving at the level of the psyche, to create different conditions that medicine would then describe as disease or cancer and so forth. Okay. And this was proven with 40,000 CAT scans, where if a person had, after he created his taxonomy of disease and its link to the psyche, he was able to understand how every biological expression, what we call disease, is related to a certain level of psychological trauma. And he showed how it made very good biological sense how the, a tumor in the breast versus a tumor in the prostate or something was actually graphically, holographically, developing to represent this level of trauma, and the psyche would then trigger a response from a brain center that had to do, for instance, let's call a tumor in the endocrine system somewhere, and it would trigger an old endodermal, germ level of tissue in the hindbrain to biologically express, grow a tumor. And then what would happen is that would go full circle when it relieved the pressure on the level of the psyche, go full circle. You would go through predictable symptoms. And if you understand the biphasic nature of it as a bioterrain specialist, then you would know how to work with it. If it's appropriate, sometimes you work with the patient to understand the level of the issue at the psyche, and then you make sure the body, through other levels of testing, is supplied with all the ingredients it needs so that you don't get caught on a biological plateau, which is what's happening to everybody these days. And then, it goes full circle. Now, the way the germs or the microbes come in is he found, oh, by the way, at the level of the brain, the CAT scan, when somebody, say, had a breast tumor, he would say, okay, you're going to find on CAT scan a lesion right here. And 100% of the time, 40,000 CAT scans, the lesion was found exactly where he said it would be. And then at the completion of treatment, when the person, is finished with the biological expression, they do a CAT scan again and find that the lesion on the brain scan was gone.
Wow.
So pretty neat stuff.
Yeah.
So he found that embryologically, you have three germ levels of tissue, endoderm, mesoderm, and ectoderm. And each one of those, as you can see, I won't go through them all, kind of evolves in a way embryologically along with certain symbionts, we'll call them, like in endoderm, the brainstem derived tissues, work with mycobacterium, fungi, and you can read the rest of them yourself. Going to ectodermal, more the recent embryological development that also corresponds to the cerebral cortex. And he said virus, and he was always careful to say if virus exists the way we think they do, because he knew it was different. I have cell fragments in parentheses because that's kind of where I come from. And these ectodermal tissues, would require these, what we call virus, in order to degrade the diseased tissues or the tumor. And if you intervene with chemo and antibiotics and all the stupid stuff we do, then it kills these guys. And for instance, go back to the endoderm and you have a tumor in the breast, then what happens is because there's not sufficient amount of these organisms that in phase 2 would normally secrete enzymes that would digest the tumor because it was no longer necessary, then that doesn't happen and you get one of those biological plateaus that we're talking about. So he not only, showed how microbes play a role, but he also went more specific and showed how these microbes play a specific role depending on the tissue involved, depending on the part of the brain involved, and related it all back to how these things all evolve together on an embryological level. How are we doing? One last slide here.
Good. Keep going.
Okay, so we have a picture, which I won't go through to your right there, and that's what I've seen for years under the microscope when I look at people's bloods. When I see progression into bacterial or fungal forms or chondrites or or all the things in between, then I can tell you exactly what's going on in people's bodies. Now, I would do something different also because without a somatoscope or a universal microscope, I can't see the resolution that would allow me to say, oh, that is a pleomorphic progression of a certain organism, and therefore I wouldn't be able to understand maybe what isopathic remedy, the pharmacology developed by Enderlein, which one to use or how to orchestrate the whole bioterrain therapy. So what I would do, and I learned this from another gentleman, we would take these isopathic remedies in a liquid form. We take about a dozen blood slides and the same blood at the same time from a person, and then introduce these liquid forms of the isopathic, say from let's just say from the strain of mucorracimosis, and then if looking at it within moments under the slide, if all of a sudden you saw the protids progress in a way that would give byproducts that we knew were the product of mucorracimosis, then you knew what you were dealing with. And then there's other ways we'd measure with labs and things that would corroborate, but that's the way I would use the dark field microscope. And in the case of mucor, one of these little protids, one of the things they do, sometimes they go through different progressions in order to create fibrin in the blood that then becomes the basis of thrombocytes, which is the whole blood clotting mechanism. And then on the other hand, if they overstay their welcome into these advanced forms inappropriately, then when you just look at the blood and see all these cobwebs in the blood, or if you put on the developer of the mucorracimosis that I'm talking about, and all of a sudden, all these cobwebs appear, then you knew that you had to regress that phase of mucorracimosis back to its protid form so that the normal viscosity of the blood would take place. Occur. And that is, the main reason why blood becomes too viscous. So rather than taking aspirin a day and Coumadin, which is rat poison, and all these stupid things we do that, degrade our health in order because we're afraid of a blood clot. Well, if you took mucorracimosis, not only would it be a great immunization in other ways, but it would also balance the viscosity out perfectly in a biological way, and you'd have improvements to microcirculation and all sorts of good things that you can't possibly get by taking rat poison. Okay, so here we go. Viruses, cell debris. A high cell debris reading on ionization analysis, that's just one of the labs I do, one of many, indicates rapid aging and tissue degeneration. So, normally cells die every day, and we could get more involved, but bottom line, when the cell fragments raise to an inordinately high amount, it shows that there's, rapid aging and degeneration of tissues, and I'm simplifying greatly here. But then these cell fragments will then, and then this is not anything I can prove, but a lot of folks I know in the field kind of share my opinion, and I believe this way because when I take measures to reduce the cell fragments, when I see them on the lab test, very often people start getting better. So maybe it's kind of a kind of looking at things and jerry rigging from, in a backwards way, but it works. So I have a belief system that there's something to this. So cell fragments, which, might be construed as virus, and these interact with whole cell DNA or RNA to initiate important self-correcting mechanisms, including the release of surfactants that actually dissolve diseased tissue and cleanse the fluids and so forth. And, whether you're talking about in the world of viruses, regular viruses or retro, well, that just has to do with the sequencing of how, the whole process of this interaction happens, and retroviruses, which people talk about these days, is just a use of, what's it called, reverse transcriptase that, just changes the sequence of events. And that's the only difference between the kind of viruses. And again, we're simplifying. So viruses are actually inside of us. They're produced inside of us. And just like protids, somatids, virus, they're all produced from our own cells. And another thing I didn't say, when I'm looking at people's blood, I can see, in the old school, we used to call it parasitized blood, because we'd see these bulging little masses inside blood cells and white blood cells. And, then that means there's a little factory going on inside there. And if you watched it, all of a sudden you see it birthing all these other little creatures that doctors call, bacteria and such. So let's see, where were we? So exogenous virus. Go ahead.
So when you're saying cell debris, do you conceptualize these within this pleomorphic process? Are these alive? Or are these specifically just, like you said, I guess, fragments? So these aren't pleomorphically being created like in a smaller version of a bacteria, but are instead kind of more like just the result of that. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how this works with pleomorphism.
So here's what I believe. Again, just based on functional medicine, I can't prove it, and I'd love for people to prove this out, and someday we'll get there. But again, on a functional level, things work with this understanding. So viruses, being cell fragments, they're like dead cell matter, but they have the ability to interact with regular cells. And, much like we might theorize a virus might do in our common understanding, and then not only provoke the cell to produce, as we say, surfactants and things that help dissolve dead tissue, and also to cleanse, but also initiate pleomorphic progression of, the protisomatids to go into bacterial fungi stage and so forth, that are all part of the process. So they all interplay together. I can't prove, exactly how that works, but we measure that on, the cell fragments with ionization analysis. And when we take measures to get the cell fragments reduced, which means we're actually interacting with the mechanisms why cells are dying at a higher rate and not being eliminated sufficiently from the body, and therefore always coincidentally seems to be linked to poor health and symptoms. When we get that under control, then people regain their health. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm just a clinician. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a Royal Rife. But those guys gave me enough information to help me understand how to test for certain things, and then functionally create changes in the bioterrain that coincidentally, we seem to notice that people get better more than not when you do these things. So that's all I can say is what I know from practical experience.
So go
ahead.
From my research, right on with that, it seems like from what I've found by reading, Naissance and Beauchamp and newer people, is that it seems like to me within the pleomorphic cycle, typically, first and foremost, we have the bacteria is created to do the job. But when there's an overtoxification, when the bacteria is overwhelmed, we have a backup system that kicks in where these solvents are initiated via these quote unquote viruses. which are just like you said, these cell fragmentary, inert, organic molecules or something. I don't know. They're not alive per se, where they don't have respiration or the same effects that something like bacteria would, but they're doing something. They're doing something that's been sent
Yeah.
there to clean up. Yeah.
And when we say not alive, well, that's another discussion. A rock is alive. It may not be walking around or breathing, but a rock is a energetic vibration of elements that are coming from a level of consciousness that is absolutely alive. So, we have to redefine our entire reality to really understand things. So all the next points are things we've already talked about. I've finished with a little treat the body, not the disease statement. The study of anthroposophic medicine, which I've been very involved with for a long time. Homeopathic miasms, which get into root race consciousness. Asian medicine and waveform physics will further enlighten practitioners to the true nature of human ecosystems and the origin of what we think of as disease, while opening new vistas for treatment and the advancement of humanity. And that little paragraph there, anthroposophic, homeopathic miasms, we could get into Samuel Hahnemann and how he understood the three classifications of miasms were the basis of all disease as we think of it, and they just differentiate in different forms from the three miasms. And to understand that, it's a huge discussion, but it all fits together with anthroposophic, with waveform physics. And the problem is we're not taught any of this in school. So, to our audience out there, you don't have to be a genius to understand these things. It's fascinating study, and the truth will set you free. It set me free as a physician. It allowed me to help many people along the way that I wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. Maybe created a career that wasn't quite as lucrative as it could have been, and always having to watch over my shoulder. But, I wouldn't change a thing for a million years. So I think we're good, Michael. Why don't you take it from there,
Wow.
and I'll do what we
Wow.
can.
My brain is full right now. Yeah, there's so many more ways we can dive into New German medicine and that homeopathic stuff, which we will. Let's do a couple of the questions one from the peanut gallery, and then also two, and we're already running up on 2 hours already, but that's okay. We'll crank through this. So, understanding that environmental impacts on the terrain are what cause quote unquote disease, not the quote unquote germs outside. Well, and this relates back to everything being inside. So what they say is, when I say they, I guess I'm saying like mainstream science, medical establishments say that these viruses are basically these little microscopic microbes that connect to a specific disease symptom, and that they can exist outside. And that, for instance, with the current COVID scare, they're saying this thing can live on a piece of plastic or something for up to 7 days. Some have said 14 days. I mean, it just shows how they know nothing, because they're saying something different every time. But how are they saying this? How are they proving this? Are they proving this? Knowing what we've talked about, how can they get away with saying that there is this virus that's on a piece of plastic that if you touch and then you somehow get into your mouth or something, then will go in and give you COVID-19?
And how can a protein survive your gastric juices? How can it get past the microbial defenses on our body surface that The microbes outnumbering, the trillions of cells in our body, about 10,000 to 1. And, one of the reasons why microbes are so problematic in their pleomorphic progression in hospitals is because we're constantly sterilizing everything, washing our hands, not just with soap and water, but with these disinfectants that then kill all the natural defenses that would normally keep more violent strains from progressing to that level. Let me give you one more analogy just to kind of wrap this up and then go with the next question. Let's just say I go over to see you. You tell me you've got a sore throat and you went to the doctor. It was diagnosed as or cultured as a streptococcus. I wake up the next morning. Sure enough, I got my strep throat. I go to the doctor, streptococcus. Well, what's the contagion? It's not a streptococcus, flying out of your nose and into my nose and crawling up and making war on my body. The protid or somatid family of penicillin notatum and Gunther Enderlein, traced all these out. And again, he, still unrefuted to this day. Penicillin notatum, that seed lives within us. And then if I, have a contagion, what I'm really getting is a contagion on more of an electromagnetic plane. And if people think that sounds far out, okay, well, come over to my place and maybe I'm in a real bad, foul mood and you spend the day with me. How are you going to feel by the time you leave? You're going to pick up on that energetic and be kind of bummed out yourself. So we do this all the time and understand how energetics are contagions. But now consider that same bandwidth that, you're not at your best when you have a strep throat, as we call it. So, I might be vulnerable. 6 other people might be in the same room with you and not get it, but I do because my resistance is lower on different levels. I pick up that frequency. And then remember, as above, so below. Now, all the biological processes necessarily holographically represent the same exact frequency, which means creating the bioterrain conditions where a penicillin notatum pleomorphically progresses to the bacterial stage. It's now going to be cultured as a strep throat. And because that poor little SOB is caught at the scene of the crime, he gets circumstantially blamed for the whole mess in the first place. And, oh, hey, for a good idea, let's just give you antibiotics, because what if it spreads to your kidneys and into your heart and everything else? And so that's another whole discussion. But I'm just trying to suggest that maybe there's mechanisms at play that we don't have a clue about. That's all I have to say, Mike.
Interesting, because that was kind of relating to the next question, like a family, somebody comes down with the cold and the rest of the family gets the cold, but that's not always the case. I mean, usually if you have a large family, there's a couple people that just never get sick. And how many people do we know in the world that just never get sick? And like my wife, she's a nurse. I've been a nurse for a decade now, and she's like never sick, and she's around sick people all day long, and she's never sick because she's got an amazing immune system, and more than that, she's got an amazing countenance on life. She's just a very amazing person that just doesn't get emotional. She's very steady. She's very even Steven, and she just doesn't let things affect her, and she does not get sick. My dad, he was like never sick. In my 20s, I was always sick, and your son, who was one of my best friends, was never sick. And I was like, how are you never sick, man? Like, we go out and party. I mean, we were DJs in Hollywood, like raging, drinking. We were in our 20s having fun, right? Never sick. And so this is when I started to wake up to this. It's much, we want to, in this scientific modernism, want to find the connection between stuff, between the remedies, right? Even in the more holistic kind of natural medicine side, we're always looking for, right now, what's the big thing? Vitamin C, chaga, shout out to Cliff High and his chaga gangsters. But it's funny, it's like chaga mushroom and vitamin C, and that's all great, but we got to expand our mind, guys. And this is why we talk about the physics all the time on this channel. It's way beyond the stuff, the molecules. Another question, like childhood disease, like measles. We talked about Dr. Lenka, how he put out €100,000 gamble, a bet to see if someone could prove to him that there's such thing as a measles virus. And it went to a higher court, and the guy who tried to counter him and win the €100,000 lost in a higher court. He had 6 documents he put forth that were all termed to be insufficient by the court. And so that bet's still out there for €100,000 for someone to prove that there's such thing as a measles virus. Same with HIV, same with all these things. But with children's, like the chicken pox or measles, how does that, in your mind, is that kind of the same thing? How does that work? And we know that that's nature's way of strengthening a children's immune system, right? And resolve against future chronic illness and stuff.
Yeah, and it's been well researched that measles, for instance, conveys informational fields into a body when you express measles that later on will not allow a cancer process. You remember, I hate to use the word cancer even, but that biological expression we call cancer, it prevents it from getting on an uncomfortable biological plateau. So these things are all part of nature's design to make us impervious. And what I love about New German medicine, to actually evolve our consciousness beyond lower animal instinctual survival mindset, which is what contemporary medicine and education is trying to constantly keep us in that lower state of mindset. And you talked about your wife. Well, I used to be inundated with, I see 30 people a day, and I was just around sick people all the time. And in earlier years, I just said, well, I'm not worried about catching anything because I have doctor's immunity. Well, and that's just something that we throw around. It's like, yeah, doctor's immunity. Well, that would suggest that somewhere on some level you're resistant when you're playing that role. So why the hell all of a sudden does everybody need vaccines to keep from getting sick? And medical thinking, there's all these disconnects and incongruities that if you just thought about everything they say, it just doesn't make any sense anymore.
Yeah, this goes back to history again, and how we've been just I mean, constantly this is driven into our head that back in the day, before all this wonderful new medical science, people were barely living past 30. People were sick. People were dying and miserable. And then the invention of the vaccine and invention of allopathic medicine has saved us all. But what we're finding is that's completely invalid. Unfortunately, due to geopolitical and cultural reasons, people were dying younger because they were just being massively enslaved and abused by those in power. There was a lot of trauma, a lot of war, and also hygienic issues because people were living in dire poverty. And in when the rise of the cities and stuff during the Industrial Revolution, we know that people were living in utter filth, which isn't good. But the idea that allopathic medicine and vaccines somehow turn that is a completely bogus notion, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and why don't we focus in on other historical points where in other cultures where people lived hundreds of years and did not suffer from the same ailments, and people in their advanced years were limber and robust and in way better health than people are today. And why don't we also start talking about how lifespans are once again decreasing, even though they were on the rise for a little bit, even though we're still doing crappy, but at least they were coming up from those conditions that improved from better hygiene and nutrition, and now they're declining again because of all the factors that we've talked about here. So it's they like to conveniently talk about certain points in history and then kind of wipe out other evidence from other cultures and points in time where the exact opposite was going on. So yeah, it's propaganda.
Okay, so back to the here. I have another question. Life immunity. We're told you have a specific symptoms from a quote unquote virus, and then you won't be subjected to it again. So you get chicken pox once. I don't know if we totally covered the chicken pox thing either, but you get chicken pox once, you won't get it again. How does that work within this framework?
Well, these microbes are intelligence. It's pure biological intelligence and part of universal design. And if they, just like in your computer, you download a program for Photoshop, you have the intelligence that you don't have to keep downloading the same program every day. Biological intelligence is actually operating on a much more fundamental level, and there's no need for the same interaction with that informational field. It's handled. So yeah, you could call it immunity, but there's something much more profound going on, and it is an interaction between the intelligence of your ecosystem and that particular microbe that gave you the download in the first place, that then sets you up for better health and not just health. There's other informational fields that increase our bandwidth of perception in other ways as well. So, with that interaction, there's no need for that same interaction and that same process that we would describe as symptoms.
Very interesting. Another question. I'm just throwing these out because I know we're coming up on time here. We like to keep it around 2 hours. So how do we? Another thing that people bring up, like with polio, for instance. Polio is always the big one my mom brings up. God bless her. I love her to death. But we've had some fun arguments on this stuff. But polio. So how do we explain worldwide symptoms like that? Same with Spanish flu and stuff, which we could do. I love Spanish flu because I feel like I got a good handle on that. But polio, and this also, excuse me, comes into kind of the definition, the defining of the symptoms and reusing past quote unquote disease, like the CDC and WHO are great at this and creating new rules and new names for things that already exist. I personally think that's what they're doing an amazing job right now with COVID. Kind of rebranding the flu and using these tests as a way to kind of drive home the fear factor of it, when really it's just kind of like, yeah, it's the flu. Like, we know people die from the flu. Millions die every year from it due to that, as you were saying, the biological plateau issue, right? But polio, that's a good one. Let's just take on polio. We know the vaccine is a huge issue with that, but I don't know if we've covered it yet, this like human cycle issue idea.
Okay, so polio is a great one. First, you have to understand that humanity is seamless with nature, and it's a uniform field of intelligence. Just like the cells in the body, I was amazed when I was studying in Guyton's physiology in, medical school. There are experiments that are done where if one cell was subjected to certain interaction, they could determine that every other cell at the same exact moment was aware of what was going on in that one cell. And there's trillions of cells. And I used to sit there, I'd read that, and it's like my mind was blown. It's like, wow, there's something going on there. How does everybody know? Well, how does all of humanity know, how we're all feeling? Like lately, even if you aren't watching the news, people I know that live out here, and there's, none of us have TV out here, and most people don't keep abreast of things with the internet, but I'll talk to them and they'll go, wow, something's kind of creepy today. It's just kind of off. Something's weird, So we all are communicating in ways that we don't understand. Now, just when accumulations of toxins and things happen in your body that require a pleomorphic progression of organisms to initiate a cleansing that then we call strep throat or whatever you want to think of. There's also times when the collective has been subjected to certain neurotoxins, we'll say, or other kind of toxins that are building up into the collective herd, and therefore there is a group immunity response that we call polio, as an example. Now, when I was a kid, that's what was going on, you know, going back to the 50s. And what was happening there, there's all sorts of poisons and agricultural poisons that were being used back then, things that pregnant moms were subjected to that have all been outlawed since, but they were collecting within the herd, within individual bodies. And then when you go back to principles that Samuel Hahnemann understood when he described things like miasms, you see how there can be a triggered biological response, just like Dr. Hammer in New German Medicine described on an individual basis, but now it's happening within the herd. And then you have the outbreak of certain things. And if there's a particular toxin that's affecting, you know, predominantly the nervous system, then you're going to have these responses that, you know, we then label as a disease such as polio. And then, of course, the polio vaccine didn't fix a thing because the collective was already on the other end of the biological response. People were no longer getting polio as they did for one little brief moment in time. And then, you know, Dr. Hammer said, remember, it also starts with an assault on the psyche. So do you not think that on some level of your being, if you're being subjected to neurotoxins, that somebody inside there isn't perceiving it as war being made on the body or as an assault, and that on a level of the psyche is going to trigger within the herd common biological expressions, pick your disease terminology, that will then all of a sudden seem epidemic at a certain time. So now it ran its course, and you know, that was expressed. And humanity always gets over these periods where we have a group poisoning, you know, or for instance, like Rudolf Steiner said, you know, back in the early 1800s, how electricity was the beginning of the end, and he didn't see anything yet, but he said it would be the downfall of humanity. Well, you know, then, you know, in those time periods, you have things like Spanish flu and things. Now, I'm not saying that's the only cause, but, you know, there's a mass herd epidemic, and people through that expression come out the other side. They survive it and don't express the same symptoms, but they also, as a herd, aren't as healthy as they used to be. And the same thing with something like polio. And because polio was becoming non-existent, at that point, you know, of course, they come out with the vaccine and say, oh, we cured it because it's not around. No, it was already not occurring, but now you have an outbreak of other neurological expressions, specifically because of the vaccine, that, and some of those symptoms weren't happening anymore. And these symptoms were just overt polio. A lot of them were what we call meningitis and different expressions, you know, based on the same kind of exposure to the vaccine. So does that kind of reframe it in a way where we could imagine how epidemics can occur? Now, there's a little bit of understanding that we need to draw from a lot of old school thought and some of the great minds that understood these things, but it's all very logical when you realize we aren't little isolated, just like the cells of the body are not isolated. They have a group mind. Humanity, we are each a cell within a larger body of humanity, and we will express things collectively as well as individually.
Yeah, makes perfect sense to me. Makes more sense than the idea of Contagion, where, oh, hey, little buddy.
You have an intruder there.
I did have an intruder there. We're running over time. I think they're done with their modules and are getting free here. Homeschooling's fun. But the idea of contagion and pandemics goes back to demonology and to really a lot of mysticism, which is still what scientism is now. And it's funny is that what was Pasteur back in the day, taking it all the way back full circle, was spontaneous generation was the prevailing thought that Pasteur originally what believed in, and actually, and Béchamp, was saying, no, let me explain what's going on here with the microzymas. But what do you think they're saying now with viruses, that they just mutate out of the blue, or they come from a bat or a bird, or they blame it on, well, originally they were blaming it on animals, going back to Jenner and cowpox. Now they blame it on DNA mutations and stuff like that. It's all just modern day spontaneous generation. It's the same thing. It's completely mystical. And they admit, like the current, was at the head of the CDC, admitted that they don't understand immunology to this day. They'll admit it. So anyways, it's just crazy. We live in an insane asylum casino, as our friend David Leosata says, and it's true. And
Jason.
Jason Leosatis. And that's we see it all around us, and it's great that we're trying to educate, and there's a lot of other people out there doing it. And I think we really covered a lot today, Bear. I think it's about time maybe to wrap it up, if that's cool with you. We're 2 hours in over. I mean, we're gonna do a lot more of these, right? But what do you think? Wrap it up. Any other things we want to kind of end the talk on today?
I'm pretty talked out, from personal experience, because of the work I did and some of the people that used to come to me in our private clinic. I got to rub elbows with some folks that are actually from some of these, we'll call them lineages, that go way back to what we would consider the elite of our planet. And behind the scenes, they're very candid about everything that you just said. And they actually, even though I had some friendships in those circles, they talk about the masses of the people out there with a great disdain, because they can't believe how dumb people have gotten. And even though it's because of the institutions that they have created to deliberately dumb people down, but then interestingly enough, they use that as justification to cull the herds whenever they see fit, like Bill Gates, and folks like that, very well-known eugenicist. And, so we're in a peculiar place. I remain extremely optimistic, even though I believe we haven't seen anything yet. And I know they have a next phase of operation ready to launch after this. But I will default to higher intelligences in the universe. And this is nothing more than a brief moment in history where all of our illnesses and our ignorance is coming to the surface. And these people that are perpetrating these myths really have no power except for what they, get from us. So people are waking up. Good doctors are coming out and speaking out. And things are going to get a lot better after a few more bumps here. And we're in for some really pleasant surprises. Just make sure, folks, that you're informed, that you're not in fear. You'll not only survive this, but you'll come out the other end and be part of a new world that we're all going to create together. Because it's our time. It's our time right now.
Bravo. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It's a great way to end it. That's why we stress ideas of universal law and controlling what you can in your own paradigm, because this is a thought-based universe. So you are the power of your own life. So take control of your life, and live your life in joy and harmony, and listen to your heart and your intuition. And we always say the easiest way to do that is get out in nature, go start a garden, go for hikes, go camping. I mean, this is what what we're seeing now is this explosion of people doing that with like a lot of the millennials getting in buses and just, being able to code or program or write and travel until the national parks. And now you can't do that because you're quarantined. What do you know? But we're seeing it. We're seeing the awakening happening, and we're trying to be a part of that. Well, we are a part of that, and that's what Alfa Vedic's all about. So you can go to our website, alfavedic.com, and check out our products and our information there. You can join us on Telegram, t.me/Alfa Vedic. We have an amazing community on there that's growing every day. We talk about this all day long. And if you want to support us and support this podcast, you can go to our Patreon, patreon.com/Alfa Vedic. We are working on growing rapidly. We'll have a ton of premier content on there as we know more and more censorship's coming. We are also working with partners on blockchain to develop decentralized systems. Our blockchain partners, Cordal, which I'm one of the founders of, is about to launch, and that is a decentralized web hosting platform. So we know we need to be the change that we want to see. So we want to reiterate that. Go out in your life, spread this awareness, spread the love. Don't be in fear. Don't be afraid of the boogeyman. And this world is going to change rapidly because that's how it works. Love you guys. Thanks so much for joining us today. Bear, that was a great presentation. Thanks for all the hard work you did there, man. I know a lot of people are really going to appreciate that. You can watch this on YouTube at 5 p.m. on our YouTube channel, or listen to it as a podcast anywhere podcasts are, Podbean, iTunes, etc. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, and get out there and have some fun in life. Cheers.